Hi, this is Hank Hanegraaff, president of the Christian Research Institute and host of the Bible Answer Man broadcast with another Hank Unplugged short. I want to talk a little bit today about the decoupling of biological sex and gender. And that has led to loose ends popping out all over the place. The absurdities that have resulted as a result of this particular decoupling are mind-boggling. So, for example, Cheryl Cookie, who is a Purdue University professor of American and Gender Studies, writes about Leah Thomas and the fact that she has become victorious in NCAA swimming, and that should be celebrated as an advancement in women's sports. I mean, this is not an insignificant person. This is a person with a huge platform. She's using her NBC platform to say that Leah Thomas and her NCAA championship performances is today giving women a crucial opportunity, and that anyone who really cares about the advancement of sports, women's sports in particular, should be celebrating her win. And then she goes on to decry the reality that sports at present are unfortunately organized based on a belief she thinks is a false belief, a belief in natural differences between men and women, and that as a result, sport is sex segregated. And she says that ultimately leads to discrimination. Now, she advances the argument using Jackie Robinson as an example. He was celebrated for, quote, breaking the color barrier, close quote. And Leah Thomas, she says, should be celebrated now for breaking the gender barrier. She should be embraced for the trailblazer that she really is. So here's the argument in a nutshell. Just as it is right and just not to discriminate on the basis of race, it is right and just not to discriminate on the basis of gender. And therefore, here's where the loose ends begin popping. Therefore, women, if you draw this out to its logical conclusion, should be allowed to play in the NFL. And men ought to be allowed to play in the LPGA. Until, of course, we become enlightened enough to drop the L from LPGA. Just call it the PGA, the Professional Golf Association, encompassing both men and women. And then there's Dr. Rachel McKinnon. She's an internationally recognized scholar in philosophy as well as in transgender issues. And by the way, an individual who transitioned from male to female and thereafter became a two-time women's world cycling champion. A person who has taken this argument and made it explicit by saying that the gap between elite men and elite women in sport is closing. Now, the argument is that biological males really don't have an advantage over women just because they were born male. And therefore, biological men should be able to play women's sports, and biological women should be able to compete in men's sports. Now, stop and think about this for a second. The gap is closing. Pretty soon it'll be non-existent. And so a man ought to be able to compete with women in professional golf, a woman with men in the same venue. Now, I remember many years ago, Annika, so famous that we know her by her first name, kind of like Jack Nicklaus or Tiger. Number one in the world in golf, at least as a woman. She teed it up in the Colonial, sort of an average PGA event. And as I recall, she didn't even make the cut. And she's someone, I love golf, and she's someone I have idolized for years, but the reality is she wouldn't make a whole lot of money playing with men in professional golf. On the other side of the coin, if men were allowed to play with women or play on the LPGA Tour, for example, even a journeyman would make a lot of money. So I guess the point would be to become free-thinking enough, at least from the perspective of Cheryl Cookie and Dr. Rachel McKenna, to become free-thinking enough to do away with gender in sports altogether. And then people, whatever they are in mind or body, can compete together in the NFL, the NBA, the PGA, you name it. Now, again, you draw this out to its logical conclusion. Is this a victory for women? Absolutely not. It's being hailed as an advancement, I'm quoting now, an advancement in women's sports, but it really isn't. And this victory is not being won by robust debate. It's actually being won by robust censorship, because if you try to draw this out to its logical conclusion, then what you end up with is censorship. Under the Bolsheviks, swimming against the tide was a prescription for getting your assets seized, and oftentimes much, much worse. You might get killed. Today, assigning the wrong pronoun to a NCAA Division I swimming champion is grounds for shutting down your Twitter account and thus submerging your voice so that truth is left to drown in the bottom of pools all over the world. Thanks for tuning in.